I'm Tom Zinnan. I work here at the Biotechnology Center. I also work for UW Extension, Cooperative Extension. Thank you very much for coming Wednesday night to lab. I can tell it's a geology talk because there's tons of people here. Way to go. And rocks and dinosaurs, you can't beat. I tried to bring my two kids tonight. They're 12 and 10. They're both interested in this, but they're exhausted from tubing on the Wisconsin River all weekend. So they're asleep already. Tonight's speaker is David Lovelace. He works for both the Geosciences Department and the Geosciences Department Geology Museum. He was born in Gainesville, Florida, but he went to high school in Casper, Wyoming. I'll let him tell you the story of how he got from Florida to Wyoming. He got his undergraduate degree at the University of Wyoming, which is in Laramie. He majored in geology, biology, zoology, and did it in only 5.5 years. That was before AP credits, right? He got his master's at the University of Wyoming in biogeochemistry, and then in 2012 he got his PhD here at UW Madison in geoscience. He gets to go out to Wyoming and Montana, or just Wyoming? Just Wyoming every summer. If you want to go with him to help him dig stuff up, just talk to him afterwards. I did, and he's going to let me go. I mean, with him. So, that'd be great. Tonight, he gets to talk about this really cool thing. Back in March, some of you might remember the team of researchers from Britain published a new tree of life for dinosaurs, first new revision of that tree in 130 years. They've agreed to give a talk on that. The folks from Wisconsin Public Television wanted to record it, but then their crews are all on vacation this week. So they're going to ask Dave to give this talk again later in the fall over at the Geology Museum at the time that they can record. So if he makes any screw-ups or you want to give him any pointers, just go ahead.
Always.
You know, people from Wyoming, they know how to take it. Yeah. I think that's everything. Is that right? Thanks for Wisconsin Alumni Association for being here, and the UW Science Alliance. Those are the other co-organizers along with Cooperative Extension. Please join me in welcoming Dave Lovelace to Wednesday night.
All right. So is this actually on?
Is a little green light on?
Yeah, it is. Okay. I can't tell. So. I'll try to keep it down. I'm used to more projecting, and when you're out on the outcrop, you've got a 30, 40-mile-an-hour wind, you have to project. So it's habit. I'll try to keep it down. If I start getting too loud, let me know. So thank you, first of all, for coming tonight, and it's a privilege to talk at Wednesday night at the lab. It's something that I've followed since I've been here as a student, and then through my career. I feel a little bit honored to be here. So, as Tom said, I'm going to be talking about research that's not actually my research. I'm going to be talking about really a century plus of research that's all culminated into our understanding of Dinosauria. And I'm going to be kind of leveraging this new paper by Barron et al. In March of this year, where they really did shake up what we know or what we think about the dinosaur family tree. In the end, we'll go through and kind of talk about dinosaurs, the various clades, how we know what we know, where we stand today, and what the implications of this new phylogeny, the new tree, does for us. It's actually quite exciting for me. So a little bit of history. Sir Richard Owen, right here, was the person in the 1841 was the first person to name or coined the word Dinosauria, terrible lizard. And at that point, we didn't have, there weren't a lot of specimens. We had some megalosaurs and some iguanodons. And we're like, woohoo, dinosaurs are pretty cool. Cool enough that they got the excitement of a lot of the Victorian scientific community. Even folks in North America became keenly interested in them. And then in the towards the late 1800s. There was, of course, a big push for dinosaur expeditions in the western US, and where my students, my lab, we follow in the footsteps of many of those pioneers that were leading expeditions out west, and we're covering much of the same territory. Fortunately, erosion happens, so we're not actually looking at the same rock. Exactly. So Owen described or coined the word dinosaurs. Huxley came in, and so Thomas Huxley was also, he's known as Darwin's bulldog, right? He's a good friend, compatriot of Charles Darwin. And Huxley saw a number of characteristics that united a lot of the dinosaurs, and especially within their limbs, their pectoral girdles, their arms and legs, and he started to kind of group them together. Remember, this is still Linnaean classification was all there was, and it really was all there was until much later, or I should say more recently. And so he came up with Ornithischians, which is his word to kind of unite three major groups of dinosaurs. And we'd call those the megalosaurs, the iguanodons, and the scelidosaurs. And iguanodons are kind of like duck-billed dinosaurs. They're relatively primitive duck-bills. You think of them that way. Then the scelidosaurs are like the armored dinosaurs. So he saw some similarities, lumped them together, and then came along Harry Seeley in 1888, and he published a paper where he started to unite the characters of many more dinosaurs that had been found, and figured out that there were effectively two primary groups, and this is what has been taught since 1888. There are two groups of dinosaurs. There are the saurischian dinosaurs and the Ornithischian dinosaurs. Those are the dinosaurs that have a saurischian is lizard-hipped, Ornithischian is bird-hipped. And for many years, first we didn't know exactly where birds fell, and it was until much more recently, within the last 20, 30 years, that it really has become well seated that birds are derived theropod dinosaurs. So as you alluded to earlier, seeing the turkey on the way here, of course, you are seeing a descendant of the theropod lineage of dinosaurs. So they never, one way you can look at it is they never went extinct. But then at some point, and we'll get into this is kind of it's not that it's nuanced, it's just we find a way of discussing phylogeny and trying to pick a point. At what point does something become something else? And whenever we talk about phylogenies under phylogenetic taxonomy, we are what we were. Birds are dinosaurs. Birds are also fish, and they're bacteria. So it's somewhat useful, but not always useful. So whenever you're trash talking somebody and calling them a reptile, yes, they actually are a reptile. Just a very, very derived reptile. So we have these bird-hipped dinosaurs. As you will note, the birds did not evolve from. And then we have the lizard-hipped dinosaurs, which one of the groups, theropods, they did evolve from. So over 100 years, in 1870, Waterhouse Hawkins, whenever he's putting in the Crystal Palace sculptures, very famous sculptures, this was the model of Iguanodon, and that was what they had, put it together, the bones they had. You notice a spike on its nose. Well, it's actually his thumb spike. There's a lot of information that, with the science of paleontology, we're constantly doing field work. New finds new discoveries are made. We gain more and more understanding and clarity of the system. Remember, these things lived from 240 million years ago from the first dinosaurs to 65 million years ago. It's a long chunk of time that these critters were around. Most of what we know is not from the early part of the dinosaurs, but much closer to the latter part. At that point, they had had more than 100 million years to take over the surface of the Earth, evolve into a multitude of niches. It's the base of the tree that we're having trouble with. So, to kind of come back, Harry Seeley, who defined these two groups, Ornithischia and Saurischian, one of the things that he determined was that they weren't necessarily related in the sense that they didn't share a common ancestor. That was the view for most of the late 1800s and most of the 1900s. It wasn't until the late 1960s, and really until 1974, when this guy, Bakker, described, along with another scientist, Peter Galton, kind of the new idea, the dinosaur revolution, the Renaissance. So we are basically taking old ideas, things that Huxley had originally postulated. Dinosaurs and birds share an amazing array of characters. Well, they went in and reevaluated that, added all the new data that had been collected, and basically came out with a hypothesis that dinosaurs were warm-blooded, that Saurischians and Ornithischians share a common ancestor, and that the theropod lineage gave rise to birds. This was pretty revolutionary, and there were a lot of people that didn't accept it. They didn't like the idea at first, but this is really what drove much of modern paleontology. The direction we've gone as of late has been because of this initial work. So I actually, So I moved to Wyoming because my parents they had the perfect American dream, I guess. You know, they had the house paid for, the cars, and they had a 3-year-old son. We lived in Florida, and they're like, you know, this is kind of boring. So they put a map up and threw a dart at it, and it landed in Wyoming. And they're like, where the heck is Wyoming? I mean, we see where it is, but what's in Wyoming? So they got in the car, drove out, and there we are. So we moved to Wyoming. And I was at the Tate Museum in Casper College doing my undergraduate, the first 2 years of undergraduate, and this guy comes into my lab. I started off in geology. I was working in a paleo lab, prepping dinosaur bones. I have students out here that are doing the same thing now. And he looks over my shoulder and he says, "That's a good job. Would you like to work for me this summer?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And I had no idea who this person was. Never seen him before in my life. And so I went and asked my lab manager, I was like, "Who is that guy?" He's like, "Well, that's Bob Bakker." As if that explained it to me. I was like, okay. So I went home and I told my dad, "Dad, this guy, some Bakker guy, gave me a job." Where he's like, "Bakker?" So evidently he was somebody. I didn't know this. Really, he's still kind of just a crazy uncle that I worked with. So I learned a lot from him. He's a character. So I worked for a couple of summers excavating dinosaurs out at kind of the classic localities in Wyoming. And that gave me a really interesting perspective, and one that I really appreciated. He involved undergraduates extensively in his fieldwork and in his research, and that's something that I'm trying to bring to our lab, getting undergraduates involved, both in fieldwork and in research currently. So this is something that another friend of mine, T. Michael Kesey, put together. These are effectively, this is most of the really well-known dinosaurs. And I expect you all to be able to read every single one of those and describe anatomical details of these ants. So these are all clusters of kind of, let's say, very similar animals. Okay. The point of this, there's basically 3 lines. We have theropods, all the way down to birds, sauropods, the really long-necked big guys, and then the Ornithischian line here, which has a variety of animals. So just showing you, we actually have a lot of dinosaurs now compared to what Huxley, Seeley, and certainly what Owen were working with, and even what Bakker was working with. There's been a really explosion in the knowledge of dinosaurs. Now, when we're talking about the family tree, of course, we need to know where it's rooted, right? We need to know where these things came from, and a little bit about their history, what gave rise to dinosaurs. And so just to show you, this is the group Archosauria, from which dinosaurs derived, and they're kind of wacky. The Cruratarsi here, this is basically what gives line to Crocodilians today. And there's some strange little guys, Scleromoculus, gave rise to pterosaurs. So you can see, I find it interesting that, anyway, that dinosaurs are pretty closely, they're basically derived pterosaurs. I don't know. They're closely related to all of these classic Mesozoic, the groups within the crocodiles, pterosaurs. and then more derived forms, the dinosaurs. Each of these have a particular characteristic as we're evolving, or as the lineages are evolving, that help us as paleontologists to differentiate them. And we use those characteristics to describe these animals. They're things like an elongated pubis and ischia. So basically their lower hip bones began to elongate, making a slightly broader chest cavity. Whenever you broaden the chest cavity, you become more narrow. You become upright. It allows you to become upright. Those are all unique characters to Dinosauria at this time, or at least the archosaurs, derived archosaurs. So using those characters is very useful, but that for a long time, that was all animals were diagnosed by, was their characters under the Linnaean system. So archosaurs as a whole, one of the things is early archosaurs start gaining this kind of semi-erect posture. And if you've ever watched a lizard run along, you know how they do that little lizard wiggle, and that's them, then they have to stop and they breathe, and then they run really fast. Dinosaurs didn't do that. They actually had an upright or a semi-erect posture, and they were much more linear in their movement. They didn't have any kind of undulatory motion. And part of this system in Archosauria is gaining upright. They start interlocking their gastralia, their belly ribs, and that gives them a really nice hard platform for which they can attach muscles and compress their belly to basically compress their lungs. And they changed basically the breathing system. They were much more efficient at breathing, getting oxygen. Which, kind of at the base of the group, Crotarces, basically Crotarces are crocodilians and everything more closely related to crocodiles than to birds. So within that big triangle, that clade, all of dinosaurs, which includes birds, is included in terms of being inclusive to these guys. So phytosaurs, this is something that we're working on in our lab. We have a couple of phytosaurs right now. You can come through the Geology Museum, look through the window. That's stuff that students have collected over the last couple of years. At the base of the tree, we talked about Scleromoculus. At the just below pterosaurs, these are the guys. If you notice, they're really thin, elongate, and have super long legs. These guys were like saltatorial. They would actually bounce, or at least they're hypothesized to bounce. They certainly have the anatomy for it. And they gave rise to pterosaurs, the flying reptiles. So pterosaurs are, within Ornithidaira, the pterosaurs are these big flying reptiles. Some of them get to be the size, you know, when they're standing there, they're as tall as giraffes. Their wingspan is larger than most small planes. They're huge. They get to be giant. And they're also really tiny, too, so there's a great diversity in pterosaurs. So all of these things that I would love to talk about, there's so much. So dinosauromorphs. This is something that I'm getting more interested in terms of the group that actually evolved into dinosaurs, or that dinosaurs evolved from. They're almost there. By the middle Triassic, we're almost there. And the question is how exactly did they arise? What were the conditions environmentally? And that's where I come in. I'm an environmental geologist, typically. So I work on sediments. I'm also a paleontologist. I work with the bones. But I try to tell the whole story. Kind of the Paul Harvey of paleo. So really I'm looking at the whole ecosystem, how the climate's changing, how animals are responding to those climatic perturbations. And we're starting off looking at what happens with these guys as major climate changes occurring. But ultimately, here we go. What is a dinosaur? This is the whatever $30 million question, like what is a dinosaur? So next time somebody asks, what is a dinosaur? Well, it's any archosaur with a perforated acetabulum. There you go. I love anatomy. It's just so bizarre. All it is this hole in the hip. Basically, this is the ilium, pubis, ischia. There's a hole. It goes all the way through. So our femur has a ball on the end of the head of the femur, and it fits into a socket. This is mammals, and it spins around in that socket. All nice and good. Dinosaurs had, and then what's cool with the ball and socket is we can actually like do the splits, or at least moderately. Dinosaurs, their femoral head about 90 degrees, goes through the hole, sits on the ilium, which gives you great stability in forward motion. Not necessarily lateral motion. Dinosaurs could do the splits once. But that locking mechanism, they actually have a little bump. That locking mechanism is extremely good for maintaining a very upright vertical stance. So the dinosaur family tree, here we go, the Ornithischians. We're going to be talking about Ornithischians. You're going to be tired of hearing Ornithischians. I'm tired of hearing Ornithischians right now. Ornithischians, saurischians, but what exactly are they? This is the group of the bird-hipped dinosaurs. And here we go, the pubis and ischia are both facing backwards in this animal, and they're usually united very close together. But basically the pubis is rotated around. And this is the classic dinosaurs within the Ornithischia. They're characterized by these ornamented horns, big plates on their back, fully armored, tank-like critters. They start reducing other features in their hands. They have a predentary bone, which is kind of unique to that group. But where this study, where Barron and all kind of start, is looking at some of these very early, the basal Ornithischians. Heterodontosaurus is one that's is interesting. It has these really big canines. It has differentiated teeth in the back and the front. And it has been hypothesized to be an omnivore. And it turns out many of the very basal forms are turning out to be omnivorous. Theriophora, so these are the armored dinosaurs. They have the big plates on the back. They're the walking tanks. But notice, even though this thing is like an end table that's walking across the tundra, their arms and even their trackways are all very closely aligned. Their legs are underneath their body. They maintain that fairly typical dinosaurian form. Ornithopods, and so this includes things like the duck-billed dinosaurs, which are also a very diverse clade, as well as the ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs. They're great diversity. Yeah, I could tell you, ceratopsians, I mean, all these guys, the Ornithischians, the one thing that they have going for them is they're actually really cool. They're weird. Like, they throw ornamentation all over the place. So I would think that they would be fun things to see back in time, quite colorful probably. And then the saurischians, right? So the lizard-hipped dinosaurs. They're broken into two groups, the theropods, and basically anytime I feel like I'm having a down day, things are just rough, I go out into the gallery and I find the first 5-year-old and I talk to them and say, I'm a paleontologist. And then their eyes light up, they love it, I talk, we get going, and the 5-year-olds will just raise your ego, whatever it is, but they make me feel really good. But every one of them, they seem to like these theropods, these meat-eating dinosaurs. T-Rex, of course, seems to be their favorite. So within the theropods, you know, the large meat-eating dinosaurs, almost all of them, they're bipedal. They have also a pretty great diversity, but from them, birds are derived. And yeah, warm-blooded, active. They do a lot of fantastic things that are very bird-like. They have nests. They brood over their nests. There's a lot of fantastic evidence associated with theropods, especially over the last 15 years out of China, where paleontologists have been pulling out amazing feathered specimens of great dinosaurs. And then the Saurischia, these are the sauropods, and starting at the base, there's this guy, Herrerasaurus. Oh, I totally forgot. Come here, Harry. So we have a Herrerasaur model, just in case. Always need a prop, right? So Herrerasaurus, for early dinosaurs, this thing is huge. Most early dinosaurs are very small, and this guy kind of dwarfs them all, which is interesting because if you look at these teeth, you know, cool. What would you say? Is this a carnivore or an herbivore? Yeah, totally, right? This is a meat eater. And people looked at it and go, sweet, it's a really basal theropod. And then they started getting a really, they had a really nice specimen come out a few years later, and they're, maybe it's a sauropod. We were wrong. And now they're like, well, okay, it's a saurischian. We don't know if it's a theropod or a sauropod. It's right there at the base. It's close to the common ancestor. So it's a really cool critter. This animal is one of the things that kind of caused this big change in our understanding of phylogeny. So when you look at these groups, and the theropods, the sauropods, within Saurischia, there's similarities and differences within each of these groups if you compare all three, if you add the Ornithischians in. Feathers are a great example. This specimen is, I don't know, maybe it's mind-blowing. These are feathers. These were just reported, was it this year? It was last year. Okay. It all runs together some days. So this was very recently reported. These are individual feathers that you see here. And this is actually underneath here. It's hard to see, but there are bones coming in here. This is a tail of a dinosaur preserved in amber that has all of the feathers on it. So we get a lot of specimens that they kind of look like roadkill. Like if you took that turkey and accidentally ran over it, desiccated it, got rid of everything, and all you see is like kind of this splay of feathers and then some bones. That's most of the feathered dinosaurs. That's what we see. So whenever this specimen came up, we were like, see, we were right, which is pretty fantastic. We've found this is a Oviraptor. This is a skeleton. We have several of these, so this isn't an isolated incident. These are the hind feet bent up to the knees. The animal is crouched down, and its arms are spread out over the nest, which is what many birds do, especially ground nesting birds. Whenever they're brooding, they will actually spread their feathers over to protect the eggs, right, to incubate them. So they're not only adding, by putting the feathers on, they can control the heat, they can add heat, keep them insulated by how close you get to the body. They can also provide shade, and shade provides a significant amount of cooling. So just by having parental care over this, they were able to moderate the temperature of the eggs. It's a very avian style of nesting behavior. And to find these specimens over their nests is pretty exquisite. Originally, these were, just a point of interest, these Oviraptor eggs were originally thought, well, Oviraptor is ova, egg, raptor, thief. It was the egg thief. It was running around and it was stealing all these little ceratopsians, right? And they're eggs. They found dozens and dozens and dozens of these little ceratopsians, protoceratops in the Mongolian deserts. And they thought, wow, these things are everywhere. And they kept finding eggs. They're like, look, protoceratops eggs. And then they'd find something like this, and like, oh, that guy was stealing those poor protoceratops eggs. And so the misnamed egg thief is actually should be the good parent. So poor Oviraptors. Short shrift on that one. They have very avian-style eggs. There's a lot of characters and a lot of data that has gone in to really support the hypothesis that birds are derived theropods. So cool. We have feathered dinosaurs, feathered theropods. Theropods gave rise to birds. Makes sense. Birds are feathered. Cool. Evolved somewhere in that line. Wait. Calendrodromius, what are you doing? So here comes this ornithopod, and it has these beautiful, if I can get the pointer to work, displaying feathers coming off the back of its legs and across its back. And so we have the first feathered Ornithischian. Now what's really close, this is really close to the bottom of the Ornithischian tree. Okay, it's really close to the trunk here. This is one of those guys, Heterodontosaurus, so it has the spiky teeth up in the front, kind of the shearing, chewing teeth in the back. Chew, I shouldn't say chew. And then Psittacosaur, as we get, this is kind of along the lines of, it's a fairly primitive ceratopsian. So this is quite a derived Ornithischian. Also has these same hair-like projections coming off of multiple specimens coming out of great preservational environments. And all of a sudden, we have feathers, which are birds, right? And theropod dinosaurs, woohoo! We have the smoking gun, oh wait, and now we have Ornithischians with it, but we've never found sauropods with feathers. So the question is, this is one of those, like, well, how do we deal with this? And the answer is, well, we really have to understand what's going on at the bottom of the tree here. So we have these interesting filamentous structures. They're diverse. And so what other characters are there that kind of are spread throughout these groups? And pneumaticity, air sacs in the bones of sauropods and in the bones of theropods are pretty well described. And they go down to close to the base of those trees. Like it's a shared characteristic amongst theropods and sauropods. They start small. They're typically restricted to the anterior portion of the body, up in the neck region. And then as those clades evolve, the air sacs get much, much more broadly distributed. The air sacs do a lot of different things. Whenever you're a 60-ton sauropod running around and you have a 12-meter neck, you want to lighten things up. And so you start at the front end and lighten it up towards that. And that's effectively what sauropods did. They started in the cervical regions and then went down the axial column, went down the back through the tail, pneumaticizing it, making it lighter. Not only does it make it lighter, but if you take a solid steel tube or you take a hollow steel tube, the hollow is much stronger. It has it's less easy to deform. And so their bones take on that same structure, and when they do that, they not only get hollow, they also become I-beams, the way they invaginate the sides of the wall of the cervical vertebra. And it pushes in and becomes this I-beam structure, which is also really cool. So engineering in sauropods. The air sacs, similar pattern of evolution, similar features we are seen in the theropod lineage. So we're like, all right, air sacs. It's within the saurischians, because there really are no air sac systems, no well-developed pneumatic systems in Ornithischians. So this, which is our traditional hypothesis, makes sense. But the feathers don't necessarily follow it. But we just recently found Ornithischians with feathers, so they're with filamentous structures. So there's no reason to believe that we won't find at some point sauropods with filamentous structures. So we can't use it. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We can't say that just because we haven't seen it that they don't exist. But we don't have it yet, so it doesn't exist. Now, this is the thing with paleontology, right? Recently, astronomy's had the big shakeup. Poor Pluto, ostracized, no longer in the group. We were feeling pretty left out because, believe me, as paleontologists, we like to talk to people about dinosaurs, and why not? Dinosaurs are pretty cool. But we were getting left behind, so we thought we'd just shake it up a little bit, and hence this group, Barron, Norman, and Barrett, came up with this. They've been working for the last 3+ years, basically taking, there's a lot of phylogenies out there, and a lot of very rigorous phylogenies. But we keep building on each other's work. And what these guys went in and they just did it from scratch, blank, and they really focused low down in the dinosaur family tree, because that's where a lot of the interesting things going on. That's where a lot of the interesting things are happening. So, and you can think about this with any group. As you get closer to the origin of any group, the populations are smaller. We're talking a less speciose group. Whereas you look to the top of the tree, right, there's lots of diversity. As you get closer to the base, there's much less diversity. And that's where a lot of the questions are arising in terms of the overall evolutionary history of dinosaurs. So they took these very primitive, very basal groups of dinosaurs and dinosaur morphs, the almost dinosaur groups, and tried to figure out what was going on with them. They ran them through a phylogeny, as we do with all these other phylogenetic analyses, and basically they came up with an alternate hypothesis. Before we dive into that, we have to talk a little bit about phylogenetic taxonomy, which is, I had mentioned, we are what we were. And it's basically, phylogenetic taxonomy is an easier way of describing things. In some ways, it's really useful. In other ways, it's a lot more ambiguous. So crocodilia is defined as the last common ancestor. So as you go down the tree, this is getting closer and closer to the common ancestor of these three groups, gavials, crocodiles, and alligators. So as you get closer and closer to the common ancestor, anything in that group is a crocodile. Belongs to crocodilia. Okay, and so we use this. This is now the definition of crocodilia. This used to be well, this is only part of the definition of crocodilia prior to this. This was from Romer's work, very classic work in the 40s and 50s, where he describes, all of these features. But what other animals do we know that have 9 cervicals? It might not be useful. So you have to use all of these together to define the group. The phylogenetic analysis that we do, those studies where we're defining the trees, we're trying to make hypotheses of evolutionary relationships, we use all this data. That's the only way when you find a skull, you can be like, okay, it has this feature, this feature, this feature. You plug it into a phylogeny, and it kicks out a tree, and you're like, aha, it's a crocodile. Someday you can look at the skull and be like, yep, that's a crocodile. But all of those characters are what's uniting it. But the problem is this doesn't tell us anything about its evolutionary history. It doesn't tell us anything about its relationships, because there are a lot of animals with 9 cervicals. There are a lot of animals with thecodont teeth. So it's not as helpful in terms of describing relationships or evolutionary biology. So we've gone really to this phylogenetic taxonomy, which again has its pluses and minuses. But this is the definition, or this was the definition of dinosaurs. It is defined as all the descendants of the most common recent common ancestor of birds and triceratops. So basically it's saying anything that is included or related to this group, those are all dinosaurs. And then it defines Saurischians is based on these guys. These are Ornithischians, Saltosaurus, excluding birds, and Saltosaurus is a sauropod. So basically, Ornithischia is anything the most inclusive thing with Triceratops, excluding birds and sauropods. Whenever Barron et al. Came out with their paper, they ran into some issues. It turns out that whenever you take this branch here, the theropods, and effectively, it's a really big deal, but it doesn't look like a big deal on paper because all they did is they cut and paste, right? They took this, cut it, and they pasted it right here. Poof, there's theropods. So they took this big branch and just shifted it over one node. Doesn't seem like necessarily a big deal until you go into the phylogenetic taxonomy. All of a sudden, dinosaurs prior to this would have been anything that was between pigeons and triceratops. These would all be dinosaurs. These would not. And so, based on the original definition of dinosaurs, because it was anything that included birds, in between birds and triceratops under this phylogeny, it would exclude brontosaurs. Right? No longer would it be a dinosaur, and that would just be a crying shame. So, we just redefined it. And that's the utility of this. It doesn't change any of the things that we know about those animals. It doesn't change any of the morphology, any of the characters. What it does is it changes what we think about their origin and overall evolutionary history. This research didn't do a thing to any of the positions of dinosaurs within theropods or within sauropods. It's all down at the base of the tree. So these are now the definitions, but basically for dinosaurs, it's the least inclusive clade that includes birds, triceratops, and Diplodocus carnivora. So they had to throw that caveat, that "and" in there to include the sauropod lineage within Dinosauria. And they did much the same thing, just propagated down through Theropoda, Saurischians, Sauropoda. This was the original group that Thomas Henry Huxley came up with and called the Ornithischians. So interesting that in he did that in 1870, that we just basically, He hypothesized it. Much of the new data at the base of the tree, we've added a lot of new dinosaurs. Dinosaur Mars has come out showing us the same thing that he hypothesized so long ago. So that's kind of the big revolution, is that we've taken one major branch and shifted it over one. Now, the question that arises is in that evolutionary history, what exactly is going on? Did air sacs evolve twice? Did feathers evolve twice? Are they unique amongst lineages? Are the feather-like structures completely different on Ornithischians than they are on theropods? There's a lot of questions that arise, if nothing else. See, we aren't going to run out and change the textbooks and say, all right, throw everything out that we've had for the last 130 years, and we're going to plug this new data set in. We're keeping, this is the old phylogeny. So we have our Ornithischians, here's our sauropods, and our theropods. And all we did was we took this whole chunk, cut and paste, and put it right in here. But the key here, if we look at this, this is now that all the phylogenies I've been showed with all the cool dinosaur silhouettes and the names don't have them scaled effectively to time. Now we can see as we go into certain chunks of time, the late Jurassic, right here is the Western North America. It basically catches this amazing late Jurassic scenario. But we can see how diverse things are from really the mid-Jurassic on. Prior to that, you have some bursts of diversity, and then at the base of the tree, not a lot of diversity. And so that's where we need to start focusing. That's where kind of the answers to some of these major evolutionary questions. When did this avian-style lung system, the air sacs evolve? When did feathers evolve? There's a lot of interesting questions that can be addressed by this. This is the phylogeny of Barron et al. And so we can see, again, here's the theropods. The blue here is the Ornithischians. And then these are the Herrerasaurus and then the Sauropods, Sauropods. And we're focusing in here on the bottom of this tree. And what's one of the things that they have proposed, which I'm not sure how to really, what they're using to substantiate it yet, but they're saying that, so right now there's a dichotomy in dinosaur evolution. So we have a race with South America. So South America has all the coolest dinosaur morphs. South Africa has some pretty cool ones too. North America, meh. But when it comes to early dinosaurs, South America whomps us. I mean, they have Herrerasaurus. I mean, the list is long. Let's just say that. We have a couple. And really, we don't have any of the real basal dinosaurs. We have pretty derived dinosaurs, Coelophysis and such. And we don't have any Ornithischians to speak of in North America. And we have no prosauropods, at least in North America, at least the northern hemisphere as a whole does. But we have this kind of race with them. And these guys are saying, well, actually, it looks like the northern hemisphere, Laurasia, has a pretty good chance of being the origin of dinosaurs. That's where they started. We have it. I don't know why there's this ownership issue. I mean, it all started as Pangea, so we were all one big continent. But that's one of the things that they're testing or suggesting. And the best part about these hypotheses is that, like any good hypothesis, it's testable, right? So we can go out, we can make predictions based on what they're saying. We can go out into the field, we can look for these critters and try to resolve these questions. And so these are some of the things that our lab focuses on. So I take students out to the field in Wyoming. We go out every year, and we spend a few weeks excavating and digging. And it's interesting to me as now transitioning relatively recently from a PhD student, whereas spending months out in the field. It was the classic geologist's life. Like, semester ends, you get in your car, and you go out and you're camping for 3.5 months. You come back, you take a shower, and you start class. And now I have a family, and so the kids actually go out with me, which is great, but 3 weeks is pushing it with a 4-month-old. So they hang in there. But it's changed things a little bit, so I'm hoping, I'm starting to live vicariously through students. But we've been doing some great work and finding some really fascinating discoveries in Wyoming. Wyoming, the reason we started going there is it's known as the Big Red Dead. So in the Triassic, this chunk of time when dinosaurs first evolved, it's actually cool. This is the first mammals, the first dinosaurs, the first crocodiles, or crocodilian forms, the first reptiles. There's some really neat works. It's basically what they call the modern fauna. If you can go out and you can look at it, most likely it originated in the Triassic. Prior to the Triassic was the Permian, and at the end of the Permian, 90% of life on Earth went extinct. So kind of cleared the slate, but then everything from there on, we're trying to really understand that evolutionary story. This is a track. This is an unpublished track. It's something we're going to go out and revisit. We found this 2 years ago. This, on gross inspection, looks like a theropod track. It looks like a meat-eating dinosaur track. It's a little bit wide in the front toe, which is interesting, but that's kind of an Ornithischian thing. So I'm like, whatever. It's just displacement. Uh-oh, we saw these two dots right here, and I thought, oh, well, this is weird. Don't know what that is. And then we found a trackway, and all of them have this. So this is the hind foot, and this is the front foot. Let me tell you, when you find theropod tracks, meat-eating dinosaur tracks, they don't have front feet impressions. So we have probably one of the first, well, certainly the first Ornithischian from the Triassic in Wyoming, probably the first record of Ornithischia in pretty much North America. And it's a nice extensive trackway with multiple levels, multiple tracks. So the track sites are pretty extensive. We're very excited by that. But again, with this Barron paper, it kind of throws this into a new light. Like, okay, well, if theropods and Ornithischians have this kind of close affinity at the base of the tree, then we should see characteristics of both as you get lower down in that tree. So typically, if you look at a Jurassic ornithopod and theropod track, you'd be like, that's a theropod and that's an ornithopod, duh. But when you get at the bottom of the tree, it gets a little more complicated. So really exciting find. This is another one. This is an undescribed specimen. It has, it doesn't look like much, but this is actually really, really cool. So this is UW GM 1975. The only reason I know that is I was born that year and I got to number it. I was so excited. This is the femoral head. Remember, dinosaur femurs lock into that hip, perforated acetabulum, roughly 90-degree femoral head with that little lip at the bottom. And there you go. Here's that 90-degree femoral head. And there's actually a little lip in there. It's a dinosaur femur. It's the first dinosaur from the Triassic units in Wyoming. And the cool part about the Poja, we're actively working on dating it right now. It looks to be older than any of the other Triassic rock that have dinosaurs from them in the country. So we might have the oldest dinosaur in North America, but until it gets published and we actually get a date, I can't say that it is, but it's an old one. So we have a really cool dinosaur specimen. This is the ankle bone, which is kind of cool. The femur looks like a little prosauropod, but this looks, or excuse me, the femur looks like a theropod, but this looks like a sauropod. Ankle bone, so we're like, oh, okay. And then again, when you get down to the bottom of the tree, an Ornithischian, a sauropod, and a theropod are really close together. There's not a lot of difference between them. So this is, it's a confounding puzzle, but the Barron et al. Paper really has thrown an interesting light on it. This year it's going to be a grand adventure. We're going to be up in the wilderness. So instead of rattlesnakes, we'll contend with grizzly bears. We're going to spend 3 weeks up in the Bridger Teton in the Gros Ventre Wilderness, backpacking into some sites and taking advantage of some good exposure in high country. So mosquitoes might still be there, but at least it will be nice and cool. We'll thaw the water bottles out in the morning, and it'll be 90 degrees peak of the day. So it has a really big temperature difference. It's so much fun up there. So, see, this is one of my students made this. See the little badger dinosaur tracks. There's us, and yeah. So we wanted, again, the astro. There definitely is an astronomy envy amongst vertebrate paleontologists. So we needed our little NASA badges, and so we started this. But with that, any questions that you have on this whirlwind tour through dinosaur phylogeny, please ask away. either that was clear as mud and everybody understood it perfectly. Any dying questions?
Where are Barron et al. from?
They're from, well, that's a good question. I'll look at King College is where I'm pretty sure. They're from the UK. Barrett is at London, the museum. I'm pretty sure. But King's College, I think, is where most of the research is done.
Kind of a basic question here about evolution. If a dinosaur is evolving from something to something else, don't all the parts between exist over the million years? Aren't you just as likely to find one that's kind of in the middle and you have no idea what to call it? I mean, all the various stages, or do they somehow jump the gap? You know?
Right. There definitely would, effectively, there should be stages in effect, depending on the scale that you're talking about. Minute changes you may or may not see over, you know.
Well, like the air sac. You start with
Yeah.
no air sac, and all of a sudden, there's a little tiny air sac.
Totally.
I'm not sure if it's a...
So that's a great example is the air sacs. So we start off sauropods. They're really obvious whenever you see them in the more derived forms. Completely missed. I mean, Massospondylus, some of these early prosauropods, nobody described air sacs from. And it wasn't until the later air sacs were described that then you reevaluate those original specimens with new information. Right? We're saying, oh, well, we're seeing this kind of cavity here. Before, we thought it was a dimple in the surface. Maybe somebody hit it with a hammer. I don't know. But they go back and they restudy it, and they're saying, oh, okay, actually, these are diminutive or primitive air sacs. You go all the way back down the line. And one of the papers I kind of showed with the theropod air sacs, that was another thing that they had hypothesized based on recent finds, really complete specimens, more derived specimens, and they started going back further and further, where that has become a discipline in and of itself within vertebrate paleontology, is understanding pneumatic structures, how they evolve and how we can actually see them. Sometimes it's just a modeling. It's a change in the surface of the bone, because the bone is living tissue and directly interacts with other living tissue, soft tissue, and it can affect it. So muscle scars are affected by tension put on it by tendons, and causes bigger muscle scars. You can tell the shape of muscles based on that. Same thing, you can look at structures and infer air sacs. So those changes certainly are missed if they're small, and we wouldn't see them at first, and it's not until you get a large series that you can actually see, and call it a beginning and an end. You can actually see a transitional series. Otherwise, yes, the problem is with paleontology, we're working with 160 million years, and we'll have a really great site, say the Morrison Formation. So late Jurassic, lots of good data. That's been collected since the late 1800s, and we're still pulling out new dinosaurs, eggs, tracks, all sorts of information. But then all of a sudden we'll find a new Middle Jurassic site that's never been explored before in somewhere in Africa, and all of a sudden we have this vast amount of new information that fills the gap between early Jurassic and late Jurassic where we had good data. And so that's what's been happening, I think, within the last 20, 30 years, is that we're starting to fill some of these major gaps. We have really good stuff from late Cretaceous in North America, really good stuff from the late Jurassic in North America. But then China opened up. We got an amazing amount of new finds, new discoveries, and then exploration in Africa, Antarctica has really started filling the gaps. If that makes sense in terms, I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but they're big gaps, and we're starting to fill them, and we're seeing those major trends. Yeah.
Okay, cool. The feathers, you were talking about the evolution of feathers between the different branches. I was curious if they all occur kind of in the same like time, I guess across the board, across the tree. Do you know that at all?
Yeah, so at the base,
Can you repeat that?
yeah, oh yes, thank you. I forgot I should do that. So the question is looking at the feathers and feather diversity, especially at the bottom of the tree. Are there time equivalents? Are we seeing the same trends in Ornithischian that we see in sauropod or in theropods, right, at the same time?
Yes.
Yes, is the bottom is ultimately the line. The one interesting caveat to that is there's a big jump in time between those early Ornithischians with those just like, they're literally, they look like hair. They're not, they're modified scales, they're feathers, but they're a single branch, and they're pretty long, but they're hair-like. And those that are found in Psittacosaurus, which is 80 plus million years derived from those first Ornithischians, those are, they look really similar. So they haven't changed much in that time. Whereas if you look at the time equivalents in theropods, the basalmost ones look like very hair-like strands. They're not quite as robust as we see in the Ornithischians, but they're very similar. And so for whatever reason in the theropod lineage, those feathers evolved so you get that single strand. Well, that ultimately becomes the rachius with barbules, et cetera, coming off of it. So you see the evolution of feathers throughout that lineage. And by the time you get to that Psittacosaurus time equivalents, the theropods actually have very feather-like feathers. I mean, you'd look at it and go, that's a feather. You'd look at the earlier one, it looks like hair. So does that, okay.
Is there anywhere on Earth where dinosaurs aren't from, or are they?
Wisconsin. So far, who said that? Brilliant answer. So far, the biggest thing that we have one little tiny section of Cretaceous rock in basically the Minnesota border. And no dinosaurs have been found, but one day I hope that I'll have more free time.
All of the continents?
Oh, so they're found globally. They're found on Antarctica, which is the most remote. But yeah, they're found virtually everywhere. And all of the finding a dinosaur is completely contingent upon its geographic, really geologic history. And the reason we find dinosaurs in the Rocky Mountain West is because of the Laramide orogeny. Basically, the Rocky Mountains lifted up, and all that sediment up top that we're sitting on, the Silurian, Devonian, down through the Cambrian, all that stuff was lifted up and eroded off, as well as all the younger stuff above it, and then you start stepping down. So the core of the mountain is granite, and then you actually walk through the entire time sequence, which is really fun to do when you're out west going through. You can go through time. So if you watch Dinosaur Train and go through well, okay, maybe you all don't watch Dinosaur Train. Yeah, so you go through time tunnels, and it literally is you're going through. Yeah.
Is that true for the Andes?
But Wisconsin, what's that?
Is that true for the Andes? The Rockies lifting up in the Andes?
The Andes were much more recent, but yes, ultimately that's the same exact principle why Argentina, you find so many good things. Along the Pampas, along the edge of the uplift, you'll see a lot of that strata is exposed in those big intermontane basins.
So what did you say about Wisconsin?
So Wisconsin, the bottom line is we had glaciers. We had Cretaceous seaway sediments here. We would have been undersea. We would have been accumulating sediment. But given our topography and then the position of the sea, we were high enough that we shed a lot of that again, and then the glaciers came by and lopped off whatever else was there, if there was anything there at all. So you get systems, basically, so my advisor, he talks about E-worlds and D-worlds, and you're either eroding or depositing. And Wisconsin lived in an E-world for a long time. We were just sitting there eroding. And even if we got stuff deposited, it eroded off really quickly, sadly. So, but we have, good mastodons, ice agents.
Just out of curiosity, do you guys study the climates as well, or do you just mainly focus on classifying them?
So within the field of paleontology, the answer is yes. We do it all. What's that?
Repeat the question.
Oh, gosh. I was like, wrap it up. Okay, I'll wrap it up. The question is, in paleontology, are we focusing on changing climates, environments, or are we focusing more on just the body, the organisms themselves, right? the biology? And so my glib response is yes. We do it all, ideally. But paleontologists separate typically into two major camps. One is the biological paleontologists that really study the nuance of the organisms themselves. Give a shout out, there's a doctoral student in the back who's doing some exquisite work looking at the biology of these organisms. For instance, how does hearing evolve in them? They're looking at the very specific traits, specific features. Whereas you get somebody like myself, and I'm a complete generalist because I like talking about everything, and you can't shut me up once I start talking. I do environmental biology, so I look at how does the environment affect the organism. I study the organisms themselves, but I try to look at the whole system. So I'm looking at the plants, the trace fossils. So I look at worm burrows, really cool things, worm burrows. And I try to put together the whole story, and we can actually see how climate changes up sections, so through time, and how those organisms respond to that climatic system. I'm actually working now with Warren Porter in zoology, and we're doing ecological modeling, trying to put this basically into the computer world and see if we can like tweak the parameters and see what are the major causes for evolutionary features such as feathers, which is kind of fascinating. But yes, so long-winded way of saying yeah.
How well is this new theory being accepted?
That is a great question. How well is this new theory being new hypothesis being accepted? And I think it's actually being accepted exactly the way it should be, which is, wow, that's really cool. I have no idea if it's true. Let's test this. And then it's a bell curve, right? The majority, I would say, are like, yeah, this is really neat. Let's discuss this. We need to focus on the base of the tree, and maybe that's where we should like throw our energies.
Is there going to be a red team and a blue team on this?
What's that? Yeah. We could.
Never heard that until last week. So.
Yeah. Me either. So,
I do have a question.
Yes.
How do you go about, you've got tracks, you think they're really old?
Yes.
How do you go about dating track?
The track themselves is like the bones. Typically, we aren't dating the bones, so it's not like mastodon. We can go out and we can drill a hole, pull out some material, dissolve it all, get the collagen, and go date it. Woohoo! Carbon date, we got it. Can't do that with bones. So how do we know the age of tracks? How do we know the age of these bones? It's through various techniques, mostly aiming at understanding the age of the rock that those things are preserved in. And in the case of the tracks, we have a marine succession right above it, which has marine fossils that are well dated to ash layers laterally. So we know that this organism, it was around this 2-3 million year chunk of time, because that organism is really well dated somewhere else. And so we can infer based on evolutionary relationships, et cetera, that's the time of that rock. And I have rocks below it dated in a similar manner, so I know within 10 million years that I have a track. That's why my dinosaur, I can't say it's the oldest in North America, because it could be, I have about a 25 million year range it could be in right now. So now I'm dating the rocks all up and down the sequence, hoping to catch 2 really good signals. Yeah. So yes, you can't date tracks, but the rocks that they're in, so that's the key. And that's where geologists, kind of that, like say that bridging that gap. So geologists really help address questions as well as biologists.
I read in the BBC News science section about a week ago,
Okay.
and a couple of scientists from Britain have made a hypothesis that dinosaurs were very dominant in that period because there was a huge volcanic eruption, and they traced mercury and all that. I don't know the details. And they attributed that to the huge volcanic eruption that made the dinosaur population dominant in those periods. I don't know whether you have come across that article, or I'm not an expert, I just saw that.
Okay, so one of the, you're asking that there's, what's the relationship between volcanic activity, major volcanic activity, and the diversity that really supported dinosaurs? And I think, and I'm not sure, the bottom line is I don't know the BBC report you're referring to, unfortunately, but I can say that at the end of the Permian, 250 million years ago, when 90% of life went extinct, was in large part due to huge volcanic activity in Russia, in Siberia. And so the Siberian traps, basically if you took all of the material that was spewed out from these volcanoes, this basaltic field, and you were to spread it across the world, we would be about 30 feet under volcanic material over the entire globe. That's a lot of material. And that completely changed the environment, completely changed the system, combining that with the fact that the continents were all jammed together in the supercontinent Pangaea. When you put all the continents together, it changes global oceanic circulation, changes climate. We get huge greenhouse effect from all this methane and carbon and all the gases that are coming out of the volcanoes. So all of that's affecting the Permian Triassic world, and coming into the Triassic, only things that, combined with really low oxygen, the only things that could survive really were pretty, well, they were able to handle it, right? Able to handle low oxygen, so say evolving large pneumatic air structures, an avian style breathing system where it's a one-way breathing system. So a lot of these things seem to originate at about that time. So the volcanoes really cleared the stage and allowed for the processes of evolution to work on what organisms survived and give us the rise of dinosaurs and their diversity. So I don't know if that was exactly what it was, but that's the only time that I can think in the dinosaur world that there was extensive volcanoes until the very end of the dinosaur time, when Pangaea split up. So I'd be very curious, though, what article you're reading.
Fascinated by the feather fly. Are you capable of getting DNA material from the, that's the Jurassic Park
totally
side of this. I mean, when I saw that, I said, this looks like the movie, in terms of.
Yeah. Can I geek out for a few more minutes? I don't know what time we have to leave here. All right, so, yes. No, we will not get DNA per se. The caveat is there are, so, we have some pretty amazing specimens, and like I said, I talk about this forever. That's the intestine of the dinosaur. His liver's up here. You can see sections that are in his heart. The orbit lens, there's materials that are preserved in the specimens that are exquisite. No DNA. We won't get DNA, almost certainly. DNA, by its the inherent nature of DNA is it has to be unstable. Because every time you replicate it, you have to rip it apart, do something to it, stitch it back together. The harder it is to rip apart, the harder it is to, do things with. But it preserves better. So the end result of the DNA proteins are mappable. We have looked at collagen, so there have been some they're interesting studies. They're still debated right now. There was a T-Rex, and it was basically really strangely preserved. It wasn't solid like we normally find them with minerals. And so they thought, well, this is interesting. And Mary Schweitzer was the researcher, and she started looking at stuff using an atomic force microscope. And interestingly enough, that's what I used when I was doing my master's in biogeochemistry. So it's like a little record player needle, and you roster it back across the surface, but the needle itself goes down to about an atom thick, and it's using the atomic forces to make it go up and down surfaces. So you can literally image atoms. Really cool stuff. She was using one of these things, imaging this bone material that she had basically dissolved all the bone, and there was some goo left over, and she's like, what's this? And so she was imaging it, and she's, my gosh, it's like collagen. It looks exactly like collagen. And then the needle stuck. And she started to drag it, and then what she noticed within the tension, it was actually applying more and more tension. It was dragging. It was an elastic deformation of this material. She let it go, and then they were able to see it rebounded. It was collagen that was still elastic, which collagen is collagen. It's doing what collagen does. And so there was a group out of Harvard Medical School that went and analyzed it, broke down that collagen, and then compared it with a number of animals, including crocodiles and chickens. And lo and behold, T-Rex is much more closely related to chickens than it is to crocodiles. But they were able to sequence it. And they were able to sequence that section of protein, and from that you could backtrack to get the RNA, DNA sequences that you would need to make that protein. So, Jurassic Park, kind of. The cool thing, can we build a dinosaur? Will we build a dinosaur? I don't know if we will. Can we? I would say absolutely, because we can certainly take the genes in a chicken and turn the tail and make it grow really long. We can turn on or turn off a gene and make them grow teeth, because they're there. They just don't exercise their utility. But they're there. It's all still part of their genome. So not that we can turn on everything and make a T-Rex, but we can make something that looked like a T-Rex. So why we would ever do that, I have no idea. Any other questions?
So when you're looking for dinosaurs, the first thing you do is date the site. I mean, you know that you're looking at a particular date, so you're not expecting to find the really early guys in that. That's what I thought I heard you say.
Oh no. So in my scenario, or like for the research that I do, I know I'm in Triassic rock, and there's multiple units within that strata. And I know the age pretty well of most all of those. Other researchers have done the work and really defined those boundaries. There's a few of them. I've defined a couple that I know laterally throughout Wyoming. So Wyoming's kind of my home area. It's the one I've studied for 20 years plus. And those strata, if I want to go look for Triassic rock, I know what units to look in. And I know it's Triassic. Now the question with the late Triassic stuff, the stuff I'm really focusing on right now with early dinosaurs, I know it's late Triassic, but there's a lot of characteristics that say that it's the earliest part of the late. But I don't know that it is, because nobody's ever dated those rocks. But everything else above and below has been dated. So I can bracket mine pretty well. Now, if I want to go study Jurassic dinosaurs, I know that I can go to the Morrison Formation, which has been very well dated overall. So I know I'm at least 152 to 148 million. It's in that, it brackets that. But I can walk out there and any dinosaur I find there, I know the age of, roughly. So the rocks themselves within the stratigraphic section, right, within the entire history of the Mesozoic and Cenozoic, all of those rocks, I can pick any layer and I pretty much know what layer I'm walking on, basically because other geologists have gone out and mapped it. In addition, other geologists have looked at it, dated it, figured out what it is. So the base data is really all
there. So when you find something in that strata of rock, that it might be a dinosaur nobody's ever found before,
sure,
but it might also be one that fits into that date, age, category, or whatever.
Yeah, yep. So we could find one, if we found a new dinosaur in the Jurassic, we could actually find one that looked pretty primitive, even though it's in a younger rock. But we know if it's found there, we know it was that age. But there's no. Yeah.
And then one more thing. You said you couldn't carbon date bones. Are they not really bones, or are they?
They actually are really bones, but carbon dating, the half-life of carbon versus the half-life of, say, uranium, the uranium decay system is that many orders of magnitude different. So radiocarbon dating, you're really only looking at 50 to 100,000 years. 100,000, you're starting to push it. If they say it's 150,000, don't believe them. But it's the decay rate at which your daughter product, the resultant, is way swamps the signal. So you have to go to something like uranium lead systems to get into the older. But the cool thing, dinosaur bone, most bone that preserves, fossil bone, is still fossil bone. It's still calcium phosphate. It's the original bioapatite that the animal made during its life. That's kind of cool. What's happened is that
dinosaur bones are not mineralized?
they are not. They are permineralized. So it means that the pore spaces, right? So this was a living tissue at one point, full of collagen, which often just decays, it rots away. It's full of blood vessels, nerves, and just cavities that are filled with marrow, et cetera. All of those spaces under the decay process, they go away, and you're left with just the mineral structure. As water percolates through, it's carrying mineral laden, it is laden with minerals. Those minerals begin to precipitate within those cavities, and it is preserving that bio structure. It is the biogenic apatite is being preserved because of these minerals that are filling those pore spaces. So that's permineralization. Then you can get something that, like petrification, and that is the literal cell-by-cell replacement with mineral. So petrified wood, yeah, there's no lignin, nothing like that in petrified wood, true petrified wood. Whereas bone, there are petrified bones. They're minerally replaced, they're agate bones. And you can polish them, they look gorgeous, but good God, you just destroyed a fossil. But they're really good. But those are the kind of the exception. Like the majority of fossils, certainly everything that I've found, are original, the original bone, which I think is kind of cool. So when you're holding a dinosaur bone, you're actually holding a dinosaur bone, not a mineral replacement. Not that that's still not cool. So whenever our predators in there are going in, we have to wear dust masks, but when they don't wear the dust mask, they're also inhaling, dinosaur dust. So I don't know what that could be sold for in the market. But
going much earlier to the discovery of Homo naledi.
Yes.
Looks like there was expectation that evolution would evolve this being at a sort of a constant rate. But what they found there were primitive bone structures versus more modern ones. And so that implication of some sort of linearity in evolution seems to not be true, at least at the human level. Has that had an effect on looking back to dinosaurs to determine, I think this is primitive, but may not be, and maybe just a dinosaur that had one primitive side and a more advanced side?
So I'm trying to think of how to recap that in a question, to repeat it. But the idea that organisms, say like early hominins, and you can see that there's effectively stasis within a population, that they maintain some sort of a structure for a longer period of time associated with archaic forms as well. And basically, are things evolving linearly, or are there plateaus across a period of time, and then some change? And that's it. There's several models of evolutionary processes, and one of which is the boy, my brain just went on that one. Thank you, punctuated equilibrium. So it's evolutions by, I was not a punky kind of a person, it was an evolution by jerks, but it was such more abrupt changes, but that's absolutely true. There are, if the environmental conditions are right, if everything's right, and selective pressures are keeping you where you're at, you're going to stay that way for a long time until something changes that selects for change. Sometimes you'll get a little bit of drift going in there, but everything really keeps you in that environment, or the majority of selective pressures, whatever they be. Other ones can drive things linearly, fairly rapidly, and then if you zoom out, all those little bumps all even out. And whenever you're looking at 200, well, the difference between specimen A and specimen B being 5 million years, that's really close in vertebrate paleontology, but 5 million years. If I had a specimen from the base of the Morrison Formation and the top of the formation is 5 million years, they're both apatosaurs. Now, you might be able to distinguish them and call them different species. But in vertebrate paleontology, the rule is if you can see a difference between specimen A and specimen B, it's a different genera. If you can't see a difference, it's a different species. And I say that tongue-in-cheek because we like to split things a lot. But we would definitely have two animals that are 5 million years apart that we can say, oh, these are really close. They're both apatosaurians. And if you bring that into the recent, where the fossil record is been studied, that 5 million year chunk of time, that's where all paleoanthropologists go study. All vertebrate paleontologists have 5 million year chunks of time that they study, but we spread that out over 165 million years. And so there are 165, a lot. So whenever we go deeper in time, I think that things look more linear. When you really want to study evolutionary patterns, evolutionary processes, you go into things like invertebrates, where you can actually get sample size, really good dates, and great preservational environments. So as you go up 5 million years, you have a huge amount of data to work on to understand evolution, which is why people like Gould, et cetera, and that group, that's what they study. Dinosaurs, really fun and cool, and we can tell great stories, talk about birds. Not where you want to go to study major evolutionary processes. There are some, I mean, they're there, and things can be teased out for sure, but so it's a long-winded way to try to explain Punky. But does that make sense? Where, yeah, so.
Question or two more?
How long ago was the last unique dinosaur identified and named? Are we talking?
Last week?
Change every month, or does it change once every 100 years?
That a dinosaur?
Yeah, that somebody says, oh, this is something new, let's put him on the tree.
Oh, yeah, last week.
Oh, really?
And the week before that, and the week before. I mean, it is insane.
Oh,
I can't keep up.
who gets the name?
Everybody, well, the people who find them. So those two things that I showed you, that dinosaur track and the dinosaur specimen, yeah, I get the privilege. I don't know, I get to name those. I found them, so I keep thinking, you know, there's some company around here I could Epicosaurus. I'm really good at it. It has a nice ring to it. Not that I would sell it, but you know, they come out all the time. All the time.
Turn your microphone back on.
Yeah. So yeah, I can't keep up. That's the bottom line. Yeah. Especially being a generalist.
All right, thank you very
Thank you.